So, thank you for coming along to this talk. We're talking today about artificial inquisitiveness. We're all very pleased with that title. So, thinking about how, telling you about how we're using AI to ask questions instead of delivering answers, which is a lot of where the focus is sometimes put. A quick round of intros. I'll go first since I'm talking already. I'm Lucy. I'm a researcher and designer at HelpFirst. I'll also introduce Andy because I don't think he's here yet. He's going to be a little bit late. And he's the CEO at HelpFirst and has been working with Citizens Advice Scotland on a variety of projects for the last few years. Fraser, are you there? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Morning, everyone. My name is Fraser Ross. I'm the Head of Digital and Technology for Citizens Advice Scotland. And the primary sort of focus of my role is to enable my organisation and our member bureaus to take advantage of the advances in digital technologies and in relation to this project, particularly AI.
Thank you, Fraser. And I'll introduce Jane as well because she's sick, unfortunately. But she's the CEO at Perth Citizens Advice Bureau. And she is, I think, a very forward-thinking CEO and very engaged in understanding how new digital piece of technology can be supporting their service. So she's been part of lots of projects trying new things, and we worked closely with that bureau. And that's the bureau where we're testing out the solution at the moment. So it's a real shame she can't be here, but she said, she used the phrase, I don't think it would be a good look to have the Walking Dead there. So she's not come. Okay, where we began, I'm going to hand over to Fraser for this.
Okay, so Citizens Advice Scotland has been around since the outbreak of the Second World War. And in recent years, we've seen, primarily due to the impact of the pandemic, cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, a huge soar in the demand for our services. That service has traditionally been like a face-to-face model, which is volunteer-led, based in local communities. However, that model, combined with the rising demand, just meant that we weren't able to see everyone that we could. So we've looked at various ways over the years and how we as a membership organisation can help to increase the capacity of our network. So we never want to replace that core model because we think people are at the heart of everything we do and that empathy that the advisor can provide. What we're looking to do is help those advisors, but also allow those clients who can help themselves to do so. Previous projects that we've looked at in this area are with HelpFirst. We did a national helpline which used artificial intelligence to route callers from a national helpline to the local bureau telephony system. You might have guessed I'm Scottish, but for us up here, that's a really big thing. A system understanding your accent is massive. We've looked at summarisation of telephone calls that our advisors are having with individual bureau, our individual clients, and speeding up that process. A big part of an advisor's role is writing up notes, and if we can speed that up, that's adding a bit of capacity back. Another project with HelpFirst was the prioritisation of need within our extra help unit. That's a fantastic project, and I would say it's worth maybe talking to Andy about that in future. It's a project where everyone's an emergency case that unit deals with, but it picks out people who have particular needs where it could be life-threatening if their energy supply was cut off. And the final project we did before this one is our Cassie chatbot, which was the original decision tree-based chatbot, which had fairly limited capabilities. I believe it went live just as I was starting and just as ChatGPT was released. So, you know, within months of it being released, ChatGPT came out and we started having conversations around, oh, we could do this so much differently with the modern large language model technology. So that's what we're here to talk about today, where we're looking at using large language technologies to provide clients with the support they need in a more conversational, inclusive, and ultimately useful way for both the client and the advisor. So I think I've been way over the time you give me for that slide, Lucy.
That's great. Thank you, Fraser. Okay, so we started the project with some user research. So this project was funded by Innovate UK, by the way. I forgot to say that. It's very important that I say that. They're very keen that I say that. And we are very, very happy and very grateful for that, because they gave us funding of quite a specific design foundations was the program. And it was really about exploring the problem using co-design, using research. Which was great, because we were able to speak to lots of clients, lots of advisors, lots of bureau staff, and find out what's going on, what the problems are, what the challenges are, what the needs are. So 4 of the main insights that came out of that were about the overwhelming nature of problems. That's something you'll find from talking to anybody in that world is, oh, all the problems are so complicated. They're always so overlapping. They're so thorny. It's never simple. It's never one thing. The second thing we found out about was the difficulty of connecting clients and advisors. It seems like quite a simple thing, but actually getting people together at the right time via the right method, trying to balance the needs of clients and advisors who are often volunteers, is actually quite difficult. Third thing was about the struggle of clients specifically to take actions associated with their problems. So it might well be that a client knows exactly what their problem is and knows exactly what they need to do to take the next step, but actually doing it, actually writing that letter, making that phone call, filling in that form is the really hard bit for them. And finally, that clients need the nuance and the experience and the reassurance that advisors provide them. And that's really one of the core things that advisors are providing. It's less the information. Of course, they're really knowledgeable and they provide excellent information to clients, but often that information is available online. And the client might even have found it themselves already, but they just want somebody to reassure them that, yes, you're right, you found the right piece of information, and yes, it does apply to your specific scenario. So these were the things we found out. So after our research, we did some brainstorming around the different problems, thinking about lots of different ways that we could solve them. I'll rattle through them. The first was some sort of idea of how can we get people to the right place quicker? How can we figure out their problems, sort of summarize it and get them to the right place in the most efficient manner? Idea 2 is a contact booking tool, which is channel agnostic. So it would work for people coming from any source, and they could just book an appointment with their local bureau, which doesn't sound radical, but is actually one of the biggest pain points for clients, is that they can't get in touch. They can't make an appointment easily. Idea 3, which was my favorite for a long time, and I'm quite sad we didn't end up doing it. I'd love to figure it out at some point, is action assistant for practical activities. So helping clients to fill in those forms. I thought that large language models seem like the perfect tool to help out with things like filling in forms and writing letters. It actually, once we started giving it more thought, it was more complicated than I'd initially realized, but I do think there's a lot of potential here. And then idea 4, it's a mishmash of ideas, really. So our website assistant, somebody from Citizens Advice said, oh, like Clippy, but in the 21st century. So something that would help clients to engage with the sometimes overwhelming screeds of information on those advice pages. Something that would allow clients to just ask a quick question. This was a lot of advisors told me that was a very naive idea because it's never a quick question. A forum where people could share questions and answers more in public and help each other, as opposed to always having to go via an advisor. So adding it all up, after exploring a few different ideas, we reflected on the important stuff. So we don't want to replace advisors. We want to use AI to complement them and to free up more of their time for the things that really matter, which is the human contact, the conversation, the being able to get that reassurance from an advisor. And both clients and advisors sometimes find the problems overwhelming. So particularly that initial stage of the client trying to explain to the advisor what it is that's going on and what it is they need. I listened in on quite a few sessions, and it's often a painstaking process because the advisor is asking questions, and sorry, Lorraine, I'll answer that quickly. We'll have a question and answer section in a little bit, so you can ask any questions and we can share stuff for you there. So yeah, the client's trying to tell the advisor's trying to ask questions, but also doesn't want to interrupt. It takes a long time and it's a little bit stressful. So where we got to with that was this idea that instead we could use large language models to gather the information and make sense of it. So they never get overwhelmed. You can talk at them or type at them for ages, put in as much detail as you like, relevant and irrelevant, and it is so good at not getting overwhelmed and taking the important stuff and summarizing it. So using a large language model to do this would allow, and then sending it on to an advisor with the client's details, allows them to prepare in advance so they know what they're getting into, and to jump straight into it with the client, rather than spending that long time just extracting and figuring out what the situation is. So our prototype is Casey, a triage assistant. It helps the client summarize their case so that they can unburden themselves and gain more clarity. It sends the summary and contact details to the bureau so that the client is directed to the right advisor. So they can, so rather than getting directed to any advisor who does the initial triage, they can ideally go straight to the right advisor who can then do some preparation. And it provides the client with relevant information and links so that they can inform themselves immediately and try to make progress, but still get referred to an advisor if they need. So here's a little bit more information about Cassie in comparison to Casey. So Cassie being the original chatbot that was launched a couple of years ago. And you can see the screenshot here on the left. It's an example of the same input. Somebody needing to change their surname so they can update it from a marriage certificate. And this is the response that Cassie gives, which is possibly going to lead to a useful link, but quite possibly not. And the reason for this is because Cassie looks at a question and it looks for keywords, but it's only really equipped to deal with one keyword. And if it's the wrong one, then it doesn't really go down the right path. Casey is much more holistic, still not probably as holistic as an advisor would be, but on the right track. And it goes through this phase of asking questions, and then you can see the response. Sorry, it's quite small. I don't think I can zoom in. You might be able to. You can see on the right here that you end up with a piece of information and then some links, all of which are a lot more relevant to this person's situation. So Cassie basically provides a set of predetermined flows that the client can follow, mostly by clicking buttons, although there is a free text input that tries to interpret the client's needs. It sends then a simple email to the bureau with a customer query, which is usually one word or one sentence, whatever the customer has seen fit to provide. Casey, on the other hand, understands the client input much better and responds much more appropriately. It also takes the approach of finding out more information rather than responding to the very first query, so that it can provide the most relevant information and links. And then it summarizes that case to help the client and advisor feel less overwhelmed and to help them know where to get started. Okay, so we're going to try it out. It is live on the Perth Citizens Advice Bureau website, and that's the screenshot here. But we're not going to try it there. And if you want to try it yourself, that's fine. But I would ask you to use the other link so that I know that it's not a real client. Okay. So I could have typed it directly there, but buttons. Right, so we're going to use an example, which is a real example of a case that my dad took to a Citizens Advice Bureau. And he told me about it when I started working with CAS. And he was like, oh yeah, I was there just a few months ago. And when I heard what he'd gone for, I was honestly quite annoyed because he absolutely could have handled that himself. So if Casey had been around, maybe he could have used that instead. I'm going to try and channel my dad as I go through the example. Okay, so we've got to the situation summary. So we can see that it's summarized the important information, and it's also given a little summary of what the client needs. There's the option to add more information. I'm not going to. Okay. So we have here a little summary of information. So all of this comes from the data on the Citizens Advice public advice site for Scotland specifically. So it first produces a little summary of that information that it thinks is relevant. And then it provides a few links that the person can click on to have a look, which I think seem quite relevant. And I hope that my dad could have used them to solve his own problem instead of going to see an advisor. So after this, I mean, if you think it has been useful, you can just click that. To be honest, mostly people don't bother clicking it. They just ditch it, which is not good for my data, but I'm happy for them. But if you think, yes, it's useful, but I still need to speak to someone, or no, it's absolute nonsense, I need to speak to somebody, you can click through here. And that will take you through the journey to gather your details and send the information onto the Bureau. We're not going to do that right. Okay, so back to our presentation. So this is just a little bit of information about the example, the email that gets sent to the Bureau if the client does go through to that stage. And it's got the profile, so some details from there, and then it's got the query and the summary and the information that's provided to them. Okay, I think I'm handing over to Andy now, who has just joined us.
Hello. So I guess some of the challenges in the development of this prototype, first, and it kind of loomed large over us, was insurance. Insurance is very particular around not giving advice, which really shaped the shape of the product because of the prototype, and led to this question asking type of structure, which I think has actually been to our benefit. Secondly, I think everyone finds this these days, but data security, data protection sign-off is all a considerable amount of work. Thirdly, the risk of the chatbot giving inappropriate info. I think everyone's seen embarrassing examples of people launching chatbots and them going off the rails in various directions. My kind of 2 cents on that would be that improvement in technology over the last year, and I think this is using kind of fairly standard out of the box large language models, means that what was a huge problem a year ago is now much less of a problem. The problem is also mitigated by the fact that because we're asking questions in general, it kind of leads for less possibilities, and because any information we're giving is directly pulled from citizens' advice site. And then the fourth thing would be, how do we ensure we keep co-designing with clients throughout the process? A particular problem is trying to find clients just at the point when they're about to access citizens' advice. The dream person would be someone who's right at that moment of picking up the phone, and you can't, so you have to kind of proxy that a little bit by maybe co-designing with people in the waiting room. But I do think it's just so important. Like, everything we've done has been rooted in the kind of user-centered design, co-design. And even though there's this new turn of the wheel with large language models, everything in that realm holds true. I think it holds even more true that the insights you get from getting out there and talking to people and figuring out how this new powerful technology plays out amongst a kind of cross-section of users, it's fascinating. Next slide, please. So in terms of the making sure it doesn't go off the rails, we did a sort of fairly small scale by kind of level of red teaming. So we tried asking 50 of the most obnoxious questions that we could to kind of prompt it to say the wrong sort of things. We really couldn't find any example where we were like, oh my gosh, this is embarrassing, or we have to. I think the worst things we could find were where someone had asked to do something that's clearly illegal, and the chatbot just played it back and said, which even that I think is kind of borderline, because I think a lot of advisors would, there's kind of conversations about the extent to which advisors are neutral and just listen rather than kind of, so I think that isn't ridiculous in an advice situation to take everything on board, play it back before saying this isn't quite the right thing to do. For me, another thing that's fascinating is the power of this new technology. Is one hope we had for the project was it would increase inclusivity by a lot of people accessing citizens' advice don't use English as a first language, or maybe slightly daunted by a phone call with a native English speaker. And the power of this technology is you can put stuff in foreign languages, or here kind of in Edinburgh working class vernacular, and it just understands it without a hitch, without any special programming. It's kind of extraordinary, some of the things it can do. So unlike previous technology where you'd have to work so hard for any edge cases. Lorraine, did you have a question?
Yes, I'm just looking at the colourful language that's there on our screen. And I was thinking how this would deviate perhaps from if someone was speaking to another person in real life. So I can just imagine if you were working at the cab and someone came up to you and spoke to you in that way, would they continue and respond, or would they say something?
I mean, I think
you're probably closer.
I think it really depends on the advisor. Different people have different ways of dealing with it. I think some people would take the approach of you just need to let them get it out and let them sort of go on for a bit before sort of trying to gently interrupt and steer them in a direction that is helpful to you. Other people would interrupt straight away and try to just get down the facts. I think people take it in different ways.
Next slide. I think we're handing back to you, Lucy.
Yeah. Okay, so just a little bit about the pilot that we've been running. So it's on the Perth Citizens Advice Bureau website at the moment, and it's running until 21st of August, which is about a month. So far, I mean, I put a number in yesterday. So that was 53 transcripts, or 53 people we've had use it so far. It's not like tons, but it's also not nothing. And throughout the pilot, we're using 3 methods of assessment. So we're doing transcript assessment, which means that we're looking at every transcript that comes through, and we're reviewing the quality of the questions, the summary, and the resources that are provided. We're also doing risk assessment, so checking if people have entered any special category data, checking if it's an emergency, stuff like that. Secondly, we're doing a client feedback form. So at the end of the conversation, the client is asked if they will give feedback, and we're trying to find out if they like it, if they don't like it, if they find it useful, how it impacts their feelings, etc. Finally, we're doing advisor feedback forms. So after an advisor handles a case which has come in via the chatbot, they have a form to fill in, which is supposed to assess how useful they've found it, if it has meant that they could handle the case quicker, if they feel like it was a better starting point than the typical kind of voicemail that they get, and if it can go straight to the right advisor as opposed to having to go through a kind of triage process in Bureau. So here are some of the results so far. So the transcript assessment has all been carried out by Emma, who is a Perth CAB advisor, and she carries out assessment, like quality assurance of cases as standard as well. So of cases that have been done with an advisor, she'll review them and do quality assurance on them. So she's a pro. So we've done 49 of the 53 transcripts so far. And you can see here that it's interesting that the questions are pretty good, get a really good rating, and the summary gets a pretty good rating, and actually where it falls down is the information, and that is still not bad, but that's where it's more often less good. We haven't seen it provide anything like dangerous or damaging, but we have sometimes seen it provide links which makes us think, oh, well, that wasn't that useful for them, or we know that there's a better page that they could have been directed to. But the summary and the questions come out really well. Client feedback. So there's only 6 people filled in the form. Getting clients to fill in feedback forms is really hard, as I'm sure many of you know. We've added an incentive, which I'm hoping will have some impact, but it hasn't had anything major so far. So take this with a pinch of salt. It's still interesting, I think, but there's only been 6 responses, so we shouldn't draw any massive conclusions from it. But people have said that they're likely to recommend it. People have said that it was useful and relevant for them, and people have said that they have more understanding about what to do next. The things that people have said they liked about it were the information and resources provided. That's the highest at 4. And the summary, interestingly. And then we do a sort of question about how people felt before the assistant and after, and they get the same choices to choose from. And there is, honestly, I wasn't sure about this question. I wasn't sure if we get anything interesting out of it. But it is interesting that it seems to have changed people's feelings. That's good. And then we've got the advisor feedback, so carried out by the advisors after handling a case. Again, there's not a massive number of responses yet, so don't read too much into it. But 100% of calls were answered first time. So just one particular bugbear for Perth Bureau is that people sign up for a callback, and then so many people don't answer the callback when they get it. And that's a real sort of time sink. So if we can get it up to a higher percentage of calls being answered first time, that's really helpful. And what we've done is give the client an option to say what time suits them best. It's not as much as booking an appointment. We don't guarantee that time slot, but the advisor can see what the client has said and take it into account. 36% of cases were forwarded directly to the relevant advisor. That we'd hope to see that going up, but it's still that's 36% more than would have been forwarded directly otherwise. And people are saying that the summary provided was representative and generally erring on the side of they felt more prepared and were able to do it quicker, but not incredibly convinced yet. Andy, this one you? Or is it me still? I don't remember.
Happy to chat. So I think some of the things we found, people's interaction with chatbots, often they're kind of expecting the kind of previous generation of chatbots. I think, I don't think most people aren't expecting the level of conversational ability, and so tend to be quite more terse than would be ideal. I think everything we've seen, it works so well at this sort of summarizing and gathering details. And it's actually, this is just a little bit different way around from the finding the advice isn't the thing it's good at, but the kind of step prior to that is really good. We have to keep thinking about the service design. We'll come on to this a bit. We're not really, even though I think this service is working, this prototype is working, it's not at a big enough scale to really move the needle in terms of the number of people that citizens' advice can serve. And as kind of just a implementation point, like adding some buttons to allow people to have default things to click on has really helped with interaction. People love buttons.
I was honestly, Andy thinks this is a boring insight, but I was amazed by it. I just couldn't believe the difference between it being free text at the beginning and people kind of not responding. And then when we added a list of buttons, people clicked on something and then got drawn into the conversation. I found it incredible. I think this one's Fraser.
Yep. So, yeah, I would say echo Lucy's sentiments about the buttons. I thought this generation of technology would get away from the horrible buttons I've seen in so many chatbots that have baffled me in the past. But when we did put them back in, the results spoke for themselves. So thinking about the potential impact of Casey, I keep pronouncing it wrong, to Perth Bureau, but to a wider network of bureaus. One of the big things is that every client starts their journey with a full case summary that the advisor's got, and that's a big thing. It probably cuts out 1 or 2 meetings and a lot of chasing people on the telephone. So that's good. Eliminating or driving down the need for triage calls within the bureau, ensuring that people are going to the right place at the right time. They know if we can or we can't help them. The ability to do that would be excellent. What we're thinking about is the sort of technology that sits behind the chatbot. That could be applied to a telephone call coming into a voicemail, or various different ways of doing that. It could be applied to email coming into the bureau. It allows clients to explain their situation and needs in their own preferred language, which is often not English. We've got experience of that. Our previous chatbot, we hooked it up with a tool called Recite Me, which allowed translation into something ridiculous, over 120 languages, which is great from an accessibility point of view. And it's probably worth pointing out that from that tool, we do see an awful lot of the use of what's primarily an accessibility tool is is used to get our content into other languages from all over the world. And having that standard point of entry into the Citizens Advice Scotland ecosystem, which can be used across different channels and then integrated with the CMS. I think the big thing for me was, in working through this project, is all the ideas that they had and then had to sort of put aside because they were out with the scope of the funded project. There were a lot of sort of light bulb moments. It wasn't just all about buttons. So we're looking at what the future may bring in that area as well.
Thanks. Sorry, Lorraine, to be clear, at the moment, so this is the potential future. So at the moment, people, to be honest, I think it might handle it if they spoke in a different language, but it's not set up yet to handle other languages. It's not a big jump though. So I think we can see that that's one of the potentials, is to really support the vast number of clients who are not using English as their first language. The ways which it does support that already is we've seen some examples of people who've said in the conversation, I'm using a translator. So they're copying and pasting into Google Translate, then writing their answer, translating it back and putting it into the chatbot. So we can see already that in some cases, it's easier for people to communicate via text-based tool. It's also very tolerant of spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes and stuff like that, even just typing mistakes, which I think makes life easier for people too. All right, what comes next, Andy? Oh, you're muted.
In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to have a big sit down to review a month's work of the prototype and the results. From our point of view, I think the kind of initial signs are promising enough. We'd love to find a way to roll it out to any bureau that has a chatbot. For me, the kind of big ambition, the thing I'm super excited about, is the Scottish Citizens Advice Helpline. I think has incoming 23,000 calls every quarter, and I think the structure of the phone system would allow this quite easily. I think now we've got a prototype of a conversation structure around this kind of question asking technique. I think you could implement that same flow, and then you'd be going from dozens of people to thousands of people every month. Well, 23,000 people a quarter. And I think the accessibility and openness of a service that's via voice rather than typing, I think there may be a kind of qualitative step change there. So that's my kind of big dream for the future. There's also technology type of things of looking at the backlog, things like your question, Lorraine, about like validating the kind of foreign languages work at the moment, but that's kind of without being properly validated or evaluated. So looking into that properly, and I think there'd need to be a bit of investigation of the costs of rolling it out in those various different directions.
Yeah. All right, on to your questions and answers. So we've had a few throughout, but all of us would love to hear what you've got to say. I guess I'll open the queue. Cool, yeah, Amit, on you go.
Am I allowed to ask technical questions?
Yeah, if it's too technical, I'll tell you that I'll email you later, but ask it.
Deal. I think the main, first of all, thank you very much. Really, really interesting. I want to hear a little bit about the 5 questions that you ask back. How did you land on that number? And in terms of the technical stuff, I guess, is this a retrieval augmented generation system?
Yeah. So the 5 questions, it seemed like that's just the first number we're trying, really. Like we tested out a couple of questions didn't seem like quite enough. 5 questions, I think, is the maximum. And I think ultimately we might try and figure out a way to make it less, or to at least make the chatbot a bit more intelligent in understanding if it's got enough detail yet. So if somebody, for example, if somebody provides a huge paragraph of information, it still asks them 5 questions, which I could imagine somebody might get quite annoyed by. So 5 is the number that we're trying to begin with, but we might well adapt it. And then secondly, yes, providing the information and resources, that is a retrieval augmented generation. We originally did it, well, the one that you're seeing, the one that's currently in play is the one that's used. It's basically inbuilt into the chatbot builder that we use, which is VoiceFlow. But we have built a custom one to allow us for more fine-grained control over the tool, and that we're hoping to integrate in quite quickly.
I'd just like to do a quick shout out for VoiceFlow, because that has been an amazing tool for this project to kind of combine the power of any of the modern large language models like ChatGPT, Claude, with a kind of structure, and to iterate quickly. And it's a really top-notch tool for anyone who wants to explore this, especially if you're not, you don't have to be particularly technical.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that. It's a, I think they call it a low-code tool, which I think means you could do it completely without coding. There are options to add in more technical steps and to do custom code, but you don't need to, and it's pretty easy to get on with. So yeah, definitely would encourage you to have a play around with it if you're interested.
And any insight on Claude versus ChatGPT? Which one are you using now? You might not want to answer that. But...
Oh no! Wait, is that something people are very personal about? Is that a personal question? It's like, what football team do you support? No, we're using a variety. Depends on the performance. So different tools, we found different things we're better at. Different tasks require like a more intelligent model than others. So some that we can get away with it, we're using the cheaper ones. Some which require like really good performance, we're using the fancier ones.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks for your question. Yeah, Lorraine.
Yeah, I just want to say, really great presentation. I really liked what I saw today. Some questions around privacy and your future possible integration and also measuring of outcomes. Now, when people tend to go to Citizens Advice Bureau, especially, well, I know about England, not necessarily Scotland, tend to come up with really sensitive issues and not things that they would want perhaps the whole world knowing about. So how are we handling that as a scenario? I think that's really crucial. The next part is you mentioned possible integration with CMS, content management systems, or CRMs, or whatever it is you're calling them. And how are you planning on doing this type of integration? And then the third one is more feedback for you in terms of your analysis of outcomes. So you already have metrics in terms of flow, how many people are coming in and going out, in terms of interviews and casework with the Citizens Advice Bureau. I wonder if it's something you should look at in terms of the metrics, how the performance and how many people has changed, because now this is actually a tangible metric, and maybe compare it with the same time last year or previous years to see if there's been any impact in what you did, and if there's been any reduction, because it's possible that some people who go to the Citizens Advice Bureau are what we call usual suspects. So you get to see the same clients over and over again. And are those people now, instead of going to speak to somebody, are using this bot instead as an aid? So sorry for asking so many questions. I'd love to see if you can answer any or all of them.
I might go in reverse order if that's all right, just because that's the order they're in my memory now. So the last one first. Yes, we really want to work with the Bureau to access the metrics they have on their cases and try and understand how this might have impacted them. So one particular metric that we're interested in looking at is the overall length of a client engagement, and to see if the length of people that end up coming via the chatbot, if the length of their engagement is less on average than somebody that comes in, say, via the voicemail. Because that's our hypothesis and that's our hope, that it actually cuts out at least one back and forth. But we don't know if that's true yet. And it's quite a long scale metric to gauge. So it's unlikely that we're going to know that straight away. But definitely also, yeah, comparing it to times last year, comparing the overall volume would be really interesting. Your middle one was about, what was it about? Somebody else remember? I remember the first one, but not the second one.
Integration, I think, with
Integration with CMS. Oh yeah, well, Andy. So at the moment we're not integrating, but we would love to. But maybe Andy, you can talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean that's a more of a like long-term pipe dream. I think from a kind of service design flow, the beauty of using email is it's just so much more lightweight. Integrations cost so much money, probably more than the cost of this whole prototype. And even though it would be great to have all the data in one place, and that's the kind of logical thing, I think we can work without it for quite a long time. I think kind of stuff coming in on email with a clear summary and desired time for a callback is a huge step forward. So that's very much more like a nice to have than an essential.
Yeah, but it's a huge, I mean, if you speak to any advisor, they'll say, oh, can we just have this automatically in Castle? That would be great. That would save me so much time. So it's definitely top of the list for people. And it's quite difficult because Castle, the system that is used in use, Fraser, I could ask Fraser to talk about it, but he'd be talking about it for about 20 minutes.
Well, I mean, we've done it in some other projects where we've integrated the Castle, so it's entirely possible, but it's one of those ideas that we've had to sort of sit to the side because it was out with the scope of the project supposed to get the funding. But I think what Andy's saying is correct. It's a longer term thinking around this about how can we make use of these technologies more fully. So there's two ideas: how can we integrate with what we've got, and how can we work that? But there's also how can we maybe build something from. And this is a HelpFirst, I'm saying we here, but HelpFirst have an idea of how can we build up a case management system for the third sector primarily, that or other sectors if they're interested, that take advantage of all these developments in AI technologies and really leverage them to make that laborious process of typing up your case notes much easier. Coming from a sort of third sector perspective rather than something that's been built for lawyers or large corporations. So hopefully that makes a wee bit of sense.
Yeah. Did you want to add something, Andy, or was your hand just floating around? Okay. And then your first question about privacy, Lorraine. Yes, I mean, I completely. People are coming with sensitive information, and ultimately it's the same process. It gets shared with the Bureau and they consent to that. It doesn't get shared beyond that. At the moment, it gets shared with us for quality assurance. And that's what the client, I suppose, consents to. Well, I guess actually, so the interesting thing about this is so if you're into data protection, what's the legal basis that we're using, Fraser? What's the basis for usage? I think it's not consent, it's something else.
Yeah, we don't use consent, but I've forgotten the term. We changed them recently. I will.
Yeah.
I'll go and take the DPIA document.
Yeah. Anyway, we spent a lot of time working with the data protection officer to try to figure this out and get it. Yes, sorry, I think you might be right. I think it's legitimate interest.
Yeah, that's the one.
And tweaking things. So for them, they were very, very, they didn't like the number of free text boxes, and they kept asking if we could change them to be more like predetermined. But then we were saying, no, but that's the whole point of the product, is that it's not predetermined and that people can actually say what they want to say rather than being forced into a button. But interestingly, one of the things that we've been assessing in the transcript assessment is, have people provided any unnecessary special category data? And that hasn't happened so far. So that was one of the big concerns that we had, which isn't happening at the moment. So that's great. I'm not sure if I've answered your question or not, Lorraine. You tell me.
That was really good. I mean, I do confess I am an integration specialist, so I perhaps know a lot more in this area. I would also recommend, you know, for the citizens' advice for Scotland, you know, this email concept is a good, simple solution, and maybe look more vendor agnostic, where if people are sending information, it's going into some central flow, and then you have someone come and build a system that gets extract the data from the emails to then map onto your system. And that way, if you have other people building tools, you now have a flow of getting emails into your central database rather than each vendor doing something specific. I think that should hopefully reduce the cost for you in that perspective. So I do understand what you're saying, that in terms of legitimate use for the data. I do think, though, my question was more in terms of if this was Meta or Google or whoever providing this large language model, people might feel an issue with them receiving the information. And I was thinking more in terms of consider PII, personal information, where it's not relevant, and doing something to redact that information before it goes to the large language model, rather than say, I'm just going to send you all this stuff and I'm just going to hope you don't put the information that you're not supposed to put in that's going to identify you. So
Right,
I
I see. So yeah,
encourage the other way around.
So yeah, at the moment, none of the no personal information, no contact details or personal information explicitly gets shared with any large language models. However, if people do choose to, in the free text, say, my name is blah, 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 and I live at this address, then it will get sent. So yeah, absolutely. A next stage might be to introduce some sort of redaction, whereas at the moment we're relying on people not doing that. And so far they haven't. But yeah, it would be great to build something in the middleman. Yep.
And for other projects which do have more sensitive data, we do a redaction and pseudonymization step. I mean, I think there's an argument that these models both don't train and are sort of stateless. So I think it's definitely a kind of a rabbit hole of possibilities and options. And and there's for me there's a big question of, like, in a world where they are stateless and they don't train, but a lot of clients have worries in that direction, even if from a kind of computer science perspective the worries aren't particularly well grounded, but they're still fears of clients. There's a lot of work to explore there.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
It's definitely something we spent a lot of time talking to our data protection, or my data protection colleagues about in our DPO. So we went over it and over it to make sure that they were comfortable with what we're doing and the approach that we were taking. So there is the chance, and with a bit more time, probably be redacting like that. So.
Yeah.
To my mind, there's quite a parallel with, like, cloud computing in general. I think sort of 10 years ago, people were worried about sensitive data being stored on the cloud. And I think in general, the kind of consensus opinion seems to be often it's safer there than a kind of on-premise solution. I don't know, it's not an exact analogy, but there's similar discussions.
For me, it's whenever something's new, there's always a hesitancy about it. And there was a lot of fear around the use of AI when ChatGPT and stuff came out. There was a lot of people that were scared, and I don't think that's gone away. It's just maybe not making the newspapers as much now. I think people are still apprehensive, but I do think it falls to the good actors in the sector to try and do good things with it, because if they don't, there will be bad stuff that happens.
Are there any further questions? We're going to wrap up quickly. In a minute. Thanks, Lorraine. Okay, so we haven't. We're going to wrap up, but this is the last little bit. So yeah, this kind of software, these tools are getting like so much cheaper, crazily quickly. So, and if it continues to do the same, then it's going to become very, very accessible for people. And so thinking about how that might benefit your service users is, I mean, I don't know, I'm interested in it. I think it's sensible. Fraser often talks about the opportunity cost of not doing it, which I think is an interesting way of looking at it. So we're not going to go into the kind of workshop section of it, but these are some questions that I would really encourage you to think about, and I'd love to hear from you as well. So if you want to, then do reach out. But start thinking about where and how your clients enter your system and what their experience is like. I mean, any of these projects, any project really starts with thinking about your client journey, and what their experience is, and how it could be better. Think about the information that would be impactful for you and for them to gather initially. How might it help you? How might it help them? And how might you do it? And then what potential do you see for using LLMs? And what worries do you have? You know, start thinking about what you're scared of, and then start investigating if that's grounded, or if there's ways around it or not. Okay, so ultimately, yes, please do stay in touch. You can email Andy to discuss building similar things, to discuss in general using AI for your organizational needs, partnering on an event,